Hello and welcome to this edition of Group Talk, the X Series. Don't be afraid of curly brackets, Reloaded, JavaScript for Lotus script developers. You'll be hearing from presenters from TLCC and IBM. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Howard Greenberg from TLCC.
Welcome everyone, and before we get started with Stefan, we just wanted to point out a few upcoming webinars we have in the TLCC GBS X Series. We have a webinar on July 18th, and here we're going to have, I think it's 4 XPages experts. Each one's going to do just a 5-minute presentation of a topic of their choosing. Then the rest of the hour and a half will be for Q&A. So this is really a webinar for all of you guys to come and with your questions, and we got some great heavy hitters to try to help you out and answer your XPages related questions. So definitely a good webinar. We haven't done this format for a couple months. Now in August, this one is on deploying and managing XPages applications. And in case you don't get the reference there to the title, this is also for admins. So I know all you guys out there today are developers. If you're doing XPages or going to consider deploying XPages, grab your admins, make sure they come in for this August 15th webinar. We're going to have Warren Elsmore doing a talk on the implications of XPages on the Domino server and administration and some of the settings you can set, some of the things to watch out for. GBS is having a webinar next week. Paul Calhoun is going to talk about some of the enhancements that you get with the extension library. Hopefully all of you are familiar with that. Even if you are, you should probably come in and sit in on this webinar and learn about some of the great tools that are available in the extension library / upgrade pack 1. Okay, a little bit about TLCC. Paul and I are the owners of TLCC, and we currently have 5 XPages now, 5 XPages courses now. We have a new course coming out on Java for XPages developers. This is actually going to be the first of 2 planned courses. And then we do have a course on JavaScript for XPages development, which is the topic today, as well as some core XPages courses and a course on developing mobile XPages. Our courses are self-paced. You can learn anywhere, but we do have the ability to get instructor help via an integrated discussion database. And we also have about every week or 2 instructor office hours where you can dial into a small group setting into using GoToWebinar, and we can help you, and we can look at your screen and see what issues or questions you might be having with our courses as you go through them. And then we also do instructor-led private courses, either online or coming to your site. And we also have just started a mentoring service, so we can help you with your applications and provide a little more in-depth one-on-one help should you need it with not only XPages but any Notes developer type topics. We do have a sale going on right now. It's a spring sale, so we got some great prices. And anyone going to the webinar can get 5% off any course on sale. So it's really a good deal. That's sale ends on Friday. And then the special offer for you get 20% off any TLCC course or 5% off on any course on sale ends on June 30th. And there's the URL up there. Okay, so let me pass the baton over to Stefan, who's going to start the presentation. So let me switch control over to you, Stefan.
Okay. So show my screen. Here we go. So good evening, good day, good morning to everybody. I'm joining you here from Jakarta in Indonesia. So my working day is behind me, the fun starts. Okay, so I have 3 items on the agenda, and as usual, Lotus is about 1, 2, 3. This is about just going to the JavaScript basics, which should be familiar to most of us, but sometimes it's a good idea to recall what we do, and then go and say, what does it take to make good JavaScript? Because that's quite distinct from making JavaScript. And then the last one is like, say, there are a few things that are slightly different on server-side JavaScript compared to client-side JavaScript. So a quick one about my favorite topic, that's me. In case you don't understand, beside the lousy internet connection, I'm speaking Singlish with a German accent. So you're going to have fun with that, so pay close attention. Live in Singapore since a dozen years, since 2000, and I joined IBM about 6 years ago. And well, I'm guilty of having trained in the range of 1,000 X-Pages developers since we brought it out 3 years ago. And let's get started. About you, you should develop software or need to know about it, or be a developer or just a fan. In this case, welcome back. So the first confusion is like Java what? JavaScript. And it was originally called, what was it, LiveScript by Netscape, and then they felt Java is picking up steam, and so they went on and called JavaScript, which has Java in common roughly the first 4 letters. And this is where the similarities tend to end, because JavaScript actually is a child of many parents. And when you look at this, and a few of them are quite known and a few of them are rather unknown. One is self, which after when I researched for the topic was the first time I came across it. This is where the JavaScript prototype inheritance from, and its dynamic object. Java, of course, curly brackets and the naming conventions from scheme functions, whatever that might be, as well as the loose typing. And from Perl came the regular expressions. And there's basically 3 people on this planet who understand regular expressions: the guy who put it in Perl, the guy who put it in Java, and the third one I haven't met yet. One remark: the server-side JavaScript doesn't use the Perl type of expressions, but it uses the Java version. So regular expressions aren't that regular as you might think. Okay, proper language description is not JavaScript, but ECMCIA 262. Just to confuse everybody, I think there are about 4 editions of the 262 there, and depending what JavaScript engine you're looking at, they follow different standards. There are a few keywords which they are in a salmon pink, I would say. It runs in a host environment, so it's not binary code it's running. It's prototype-based, and prototype-based is neither meat nor fish, as we would say in German. It is a little bit object-oriented, but not quite, and it's functional, but not quite. It's a little bit like particle, which are like light, which is particle wave at the same time. It is weakly typed. That means you can easily bend variables from one data type to another. And then it has first-class functions, whatever that might be. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And then closures and higher order functions, which is also a construct that is related to the first-class functions. Okay, so when we look around and say what host environments, most of the people, when I say JavaScript, said, oh, this is the browser thingy. This is obviously the most popular one. We got all these wonderful code names like various monkeys for Firefox, Chakra for Internet Explorer V8, which I always thought is a juice in Chrome, as well as Nitro in Safari. The spider monkey, or the trace monkey, I always mix up the two. Engine in Firefox is actually the nation that came over from Flash, where was called ActionScript. The interesting thing is Xpages is not that singular in the server side. Cold Fusion uses JavaScript besides its Cold Fusion X. Mozilla Rhino has a JavaScript implementation which made it into the JDK 6. And then we got on the IBM side versus Smash as well as XPages. And then the hot red kit on the block is Node.js, which is the transplant of the Chrome V8 engine onto the server side. And then on the operating system level, there's Windows Scripting Host, which I don't know whether anybody still has installed it, because that's a nice anchor for all sorts of nasty scripts. Can run JavaScript as well as JRun script. That's a command line option you have the very moment you install the JDK. So let me switch the window over to the command line. I hope everybody can see that. I start the JRun script, and out of old habit, I would say alert hello world. And when I send it off, the only thing is what I get back is a nice little error message. Because alert is not part of the JavaScript language, it is actually part of the browser environment. The full command would be window.alert. So in JRun script, it's echo hello world, and then I get hello world back. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. On the XPages side, it's not echo, it's print, but that's the little differences. JavaScript is simply not equals to JavaScript. So during the explanation, I will switch back and forth to the JRun script window and explain one or the other construct. But let's go there step by step. So the first thing when you're coming from Lotus script, and I think I will assume for further part of the webinar that you will have a Lotus script background, is that JavaScript is case sensitive. I think the guy who had this idea was well-meaning, but we all know the way to hell is plastered with good intentions. And when you come from a Lotus script environment, that's a wonderful stumbling block. You mix one case in any function, the whole thing doesn't work, and you search trials. So keep in mind, it's case sensitive. Of course, if you're a main Linux user like myself, then you got used to that already. So the second one is there are no data types. So everything that you're going to use is a variable, and you just initialize them with the keyword variable and then give it a name, and then you close it with a semicolon. So that's the whole thing. Actually, that's better. Okay. One of the things that is a point where you will stumble over unless you develop good habits. You know, good habits, wash your hands before you go eating, say hello when you enter the room. Put a semicolon at the end of your statement. What all the JavaScript interpreters do is they try to figure out, oh, did the user or did the developer miss a semicolon, and then let me fill one in. And that leads to all very funny behavior, and it's an incredibly entertaining piece of explanation. That's the URL you see on the slide. That goes to all the consequences. There's also this funny train of thought that said that a curly bracket only can start in a new line because it's aesthetically nicer. Don't do that in JavaScript. It will bite you. The second thing is a nice little stumbling block when I want to build an array. The elements are separated by a comma. In formula language, we tend to separate them by a semicolon when we have lists, and that's like, say, one of the source of gradients you might run through. Okay, a few of the language basics. One of the things you will deal a lot with are arrays, and you need to make this mental push that it's actually not so much with like an array in Lotus script, but it's much more like a list. So I can simply define a new array. I haven't seen that for a very long time in any code, because everybody simply goes and uses square brackets. And then I can query the length, which is then dot length, and I can then simply use push, pop, and shift to move things back and forth. One of the nice little things is you see new array, open bracket, closing bracket, but you have length is a property, so it's not a function call, so you don't have the round brackets. And that's one of the little things I stumbled over for a while. Let's say, when do I need the brackets and when don't I need the brackets? Okay, so the next one, that's the embracing part of the talk, is the curly brackets, which makes JavaScript very difficult to read out loud. Curly bracket open, da da da, curly bracket open, close. And curly brackets denote blocks that belong together. That could be a piece of code that that belongs together. That could be the branch of a condition. That can be an object. So even out, pack it into curly brackets kind of thing. And it's quite different. Like say in Lotus script, we have new lines. Well, new lines in JavaScript tend to get ignored, or if you're unlucky, the interpreter adds a semicolon where you don't want one. Okay, so just to give you an idea, so I can simply go there and say variable x is equals new object. Again, I haven't seen this notion for a very long time, because the shorthand is simply variable x equals curly bracket open, curly bracket close. And then, since I have an object, and that's quite unique, you don't have that in Java, you don't have that in Lotus script, I simply can add properties to it as I deem fit. And as you see the example here, I can use the dot notation, which means I do that statically when I write the code, or I can use the bracket notation. And here in the example, I had a static value who said that, but I can do that dynamically as well. So that means I actually never quite know what is in an object. For a lot of developers who come from compiled languages, they go, "Oh, this is nuts. This is really bad. That's not the language I want to use." But if you kind of compare that, what we do with notes documents, where I can say document dot replace item value, and then an item is suddenly there, that should be quite familiar. So when we have a quick look, I can go there and say variable x equals, and then curly bracket open, curly bracket close, semicolon, and then say x dot hello, oops, hello equals world, and then I can say alert, sorry, not alert, of course, echo, and then in this case I use the bracket notation, x of hello, and I get back my world. So the format is totally interchangeable, and that makes it quite interesting. I'm going to look at that. How can I find out? How can I inspect an object? Just in a few minutes, so bear with me. Okay, so the next little thing which I found quite amusing is when you look at the equal sign. So a single equal sign, as we use in Lotus script, A equals B, doesn't do anything good in Java, because it assigns the variable A the value of the variable B. And to compare it, I need to go and say A equals B. And then there is what I call the old schoolmaster version, A equals B. And let me just demo the differences between the two. So I say variable A equals 42, which is the most prominent integer value ever. And I say variable B equals 42. And then I say echo A equals B. And since it's JavaScript is loosely typed, it will say, okay, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. Or despite the fact that one is a number and the other one is a string, I will get true. But when I go there and say echo A equal B, they say, don't be sloppy, have a close look, are you really sure? And then it means false, because triple equals means please do not try any funny business, any data conversion. So some people claim triple equals actually executes slightly faster than double equal, but I could make a safe bet that it might not be the bottleneck that you find in your application. Well, so that's quite a bit of fun. Also, while we're on the fun, I say A equals 4, B equals 2, and then the interesting question, what will be echo A plus B? And in Lotus Live, I would now start a little survey. Don't know how that works in our competitor's product. So you can guess in your mind, will it be 42 or will it be 6? And the answer is 42, because the plus operator is available both for strings and for numbers, and the string takes precedence. And when I want to make sure that I get 6, I have to say A plus number of B. And then I get 6. It's one of the nice little things you like to stumble over. If you say number of A, if it already is a number, the operation is just ignored, so it's safe to do that. So that's the little secret of the triple equal signs, in case you came across that, okay, somebody had too much black ink to have an additional equal sign there. It is to make sure that your data type is the same. Okay, the next one thing I stumbled over when I create a function in Lotus script, I simply say function blah and then open the bracket and define the parameters. If I don't have any parameters, I don't put a bracket in there. In JavaScript, you have to put in the bracket, because otherwise it's not a function. So little stumbling block, but that can easily take you a little while. Then my absolute favorite, in JavaScript we have arguments. That's not something you should have with a live partner. That's something you do to your JavaScript function. In Java or in Lotus script, when I define a function, I define how many arguments, or we typically say parameters, I can hand over to the function. Not so in JavaScript. In JavaScript, I can put in as many arguments or parameters I deem fit, whether they are defined or not. So I can go there and say arguments.length, which gives me the number of arguments that has been defined. I can go and go arguments of 0. That gives me the first argument, if there is any. And I can do arguments.callee, which is quite interesting. That is a reference back to the function that has been called. This is especially interesting if you have a function with no name that needs to be called recursively. Which is like an anonymous function that calls recursively is not exactly your JavaScript 101, which points a little bit to the power of JavaScript. Once you get to know it a little bit, you will realize two things. Number one is JavaScript is the language everybody uses and nobody wants to learn. Number two is it's the only language I'm aware of that both is able to produce results with an absolutely rookie who only knows the Control-C and Control-V key, as well as creating significant libraries like Dojo or jQuery, which is an entire ecosystem for high-end development. Okay, but let's have a little bit of a look what that argument thing is all about. I create a new function. I say function hello, and I define a parameter. Let's say who are you, and then I say echo hello, and then plus who are you, semicolon, close sub. So define the function, and now I can say I call the function hello without a parameter, and the only thing is I say, okay, the parameter is undefined. I can call the function hello, and I say Peter, and then it says hello Peter. So you see, it doesn't really matter whether I gave an argument or not, the function will execute. I also can say hello Peter and Paul, and it still will execute even if I give a parameter in excess nobody cares for. Of course, the argument is an array, so I can loop through the array. We're going to cover that in a moment, where I go and see what parameters have been handed over. Okay, but there's more interesting constructs. So when I look at the next one is the shorthand for an if-else function. You put in a condition and put a question mark behind it, and if the condition is correct, you get the value back for true, and if not, you get the value back for false. This is very nice because you can use that inside an expression, so things get really, really nice. Let me demo one example. We still have our variables a and b, so I can say echo a equals b, question mark, same. Oops, that was enter key instead of closing. Let's try again. Echo a equals b, question mark, let's say same, and then I say different. And when I send that off, I get different. Oops, what happened? Oh yeah, I put one is 4 and the other is 2. So that's a shorthand for if-else function to be very, very compact. And you see there's a number of these little shorthands available that make your life much easier. My next one, that's my personal favorite, that is the double pipe sign. Assign x to y, unless y is empty, then use the default value. So that's a special case of an if-else construct, and it uses, like say, if y is null or undefined. So the very typical use case for that is with parameters. Let me show you an enhanced hello function. I say function hello, and I simply who are you, and here I say echo and say hello, and I say plus, and I'll put just in bracket to say who are you, and then the double pipe stranger. Close that, semicolon, close, semicolon, define. Okay, what happened? I missed the bracket, so now I need to be a little bit, okay now. The command line window is the most hostile editor you can imagine. I have to retype that. It's like in soccer when you play the ball back to the goalie. hello, and then let's say, who are you? I type stranger, close bracket, close, semicolon, that's better, and then I say simply hello, oops, and it will say hello stranger. I say hello Mary, and I get hello Mary. Of course, for that small function I wrote there, and for the fact that I have to stick on one line, that's good enough. But typically what you do is that at the beginning of a function, you go and use the internal variables, which you're going to use throughout the function, and assign them the parameter values, whether they have been defined or whether you simply use arguments of 0, arguments of 1, and then you use the double pipe to assign useful default values. So that makes an awful lot of sense to do a little bit what I call defensive programming. But don't assume that, of course, you define the parameter that you actually will get it. Same like a lottery ticket. Just that you bought a lottery ticket doesn't mean that you actually win the lottery. Okay, so the next one is straightforward. If you want to use a double quote or single quote inside of a string, you use a backslash character to escape it. So that's pretty much in common with Java. It's not like the nightmare what you have in Lotus script where you have, let's say, 3 double commas, full quotes to get a double quote into a string. The only funny thing is if you want to have a backslash, then you have a double backslash, and so if you want to have 2 backslash, you have 4 backslash there. But proper operating systems anyway use forward slash and no backslashes. The other one is for comments. In Lotus script we use a single comma, single quote, and in JavaScript it's a double slash. That means this is a comment until the end of the line. And we use a slash star slash to denote a block of comment. Typical mistake that or misperception is that a block of comment is multiple lines long. You actually can put a block comment in the middle of a line and continue behind. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that if the guy who needs to maintain your code is a little maniac who will go after you. Okay. One of the things when you go to the Java script literature, you will come across the evil statement. And since I'm no native English speaker, I always pronounce it evil because you shouldn't do that. In short, when you evaluate functions you don't know where they necessarily come from, you open the door to all sorts of funny attacks. Also, it's quite a bit of a performance hog, so typically don't use that. You will find a bit of evil around JSON literature, early JSON literature. So just ignore it and use your Dojo, or if you're in the jQuery camp, use your jQuery call for JSON calls, and don't fall in the evil trap. Okay, a little bit more interesting stuff. We set first-class functions. I stole this definition from the Wikipedia, and it says to me it has to be the ability that I construct a new function and store them into a variable. So this is all very confusing, but when you start looking at this, I can say I can have a function, hello world, say hello as we had it before, and then I can assign the function to a variable, or I can define the result of the function to a variable. Okay, let me just go and show that for a moment. So I have the function hello, so I can say variable h equals hello without the brackets. And then if I say echo h, it will say this is a function and gives me the content back. Also allows me actually to manipulate the content if I really want to. Or if I say echo H with the brackets, I get the result, which is the hello stranger. My hello function doesn't return anything. This is why I get the undefined. I can also say variable t equals h with the brackets, and then it's straight directly executed. If I say echo t, I get, oops, what happened? Oh, okay. The JDK behaves a little different than the one on Linux. Okay, so you saw when I assigned the variable h to hello without, it straight away got the function inside assigned it to the variable t. It actually straight away executed that. So, and since hello doesn't return anything, t becomes undefined. So it's also a thing in a Lotus script function. I have to assign the function name a value, while in JavaScript I would go and use a return value. So if I want to fix my hello function, I would say function hello, who are you? And then I would, instead of saying echo, I would say return. And then I say hello plus who are you or stranger. Bracket close, semicolon, curly bracket, semicolon. Yep. Ah, okay. I should use semicolons instead of commas, is it? Okay. Okay. I'll figure that out later. But the very moment I define the return statement, then my function will have a value. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to go and move along with the presentation deck. Okay, so moving on a little bit, higher order functions. And when you look at the code example you on the screen, you actually will see something that looks very familiar when you look at the Dojo library or some jQuery stuff or some things you find in XPages. The function itself can have multiple parts. In my case, there's get hello and say hello, which themselves are functions again. So this is where the guy who invented Inception movie got his inspiration from. It's like a function can return a function that contains a function. And when you try this example, then you get hello world get hello that will be able to return a function. You can say, okay, other than doing mental gymnastics, what is good for? And the interesting part is there that you will be able to use variables that come from the original hello world function, even when you do your get hello, which is called a closure. Okay, one of the things that's always interesting to look at is what are the reserved words of a language. Because say you upgrade to the next version, you happen to collide with a reserved word. That's not a good thing. And when you look into the JavaScript world, there are actually not that many now. And what is quite remarkable, that there's a bunch of words, you see them on the right-hand column, that have been predefined as, okay, they're not yet part of the language, but please do not use them. We're going to make them eventually. When you compare that with Lotus script, then you will see there is quite a bit of more stuff. And that was just only the first page. And there is a second page that you need to have a look at. Okay. So quick one to data types. built-in is string number, boolean, undefined, null. There is a date and an array, as well as an arrow object, which is quite interesting. That's a little bit like Java. The only thing is arrow only has arrow.message. And then there's regular expressions, but that's a story for another time. Okay, if you look at the syntax constructs, and then you have the standard if then else, the if else statement, which is similar to the if then else in Lotus script. We have a case statement, which is called switch. Well, there is very important is that after your case statement, you have a break statement in your code. Because if you don't, it will try to evaluate the next statement. If that's true as well, you get more code executing that you actually want. Then we have while conditions, while and do while. Difference is while gets the condition gets evaluated upfront, while do while gets evaluated at the end. What I like a lot is in the for statement, start condition loop. That's similar to what you have in Lotus script. For property name and object, that's the one what you use to evaluate an object to find out what's in there. So when I go there, I still have my what's the object what we have there. Let me just check. The variable x, is it still there? Echo x. Yeah, echo is the object, and I can do for variable r in x, and then I say echo r, and that will go through all the properties and it give me said okay, it has one value. And if I go there and say x.test equals 6, and then I go again for variable r in x, echo r, then I get two. I get the name hello and the name test. And if I really want to say, okay, I actually want the value, not just the name, then I can go and say, oops, not capital, for variable r in x, and say echo r plus colon plus x of r. So, and that's an possible because I can use the bracket notation, same as in a dot notation, and then I should get my two variables, hello is well and test is equals 6. So, and that's the way how you can go and inspect an object that is that has an unknown number of properties. Also, when you what's quite interesting, if I say x point y equals, and I still have the I have the variable h, I think so, and then it says h is actually an interpreted function. So I can assign an object also a function this way. And when I then go and say echo x.y, and then I get actually the value, and I say echo x.y, please execute the function. Then I get it executes, and since it doesn't return anything, I get undefined back. So that's good fun with the construction, and then the rest you had already try and catch. One of the things you don't find a lot in internet examples, it throws you errors in your face. Instead, the developer uses a try and a catch, which is the equivalent of on arrow go to. Okay. The interesting part is in JavaScript is JSON. For the lady listeners, this is not the hunk that goes for the golden fleece, but that's the JavaScript object notation, which is simply a way how an object can have values inside. And the example what you see here is all the names are in double quotes. This is only it's for demonstration purpose. If the name that you use has no spaces or special characters, you can skip the quotes. And behind there's a data type, and here you see completely that it could be an array, a scalar variable like a string or a number. It could be a function, or it could be another object that contains JSON objects. And that's basically the equivalent in data exchange like XML. It's a little bit less chatty, but there is also no schema validation there yet. So you want to, that's one of the things how you send data back and forth. Typically what we see is between the server and the client. I haven't seen much on that yet between servers. Okay, so the object model depends on the runtime environment. So on the browser you've got window, navigator, screen, history, location, document, and all this stuff. On X pages, of course, there is no window, even if you run it on Windows. But you have the things that you're familiar with, like database, session, parameters, context, and all this stuff. There are actually implementation in JavaScript that bring a DOM object, the HTML DOM object, to the server side. I haven't seen that yet running in X pages, but Philippe Renaud promised that at some point in the future, which is vague enough, so he can promise that we will have require.js being implemented in X pages, and then you can use all these wonderful JavaScript functions also in X pages. Okay, now the interesting part is, like say, writing JavaScript is easy. Writing good JavaScript is actually hard. It takes quite a lot of discipline because the language doesn't make you any limitations what you can do. The nice thing is we all know if you search on Google for JavaScript, you will have, like say, millions of hits. So there are tons of examples around. The not so nice thing, it's really most of them are crap. So either they're hard to read, don't do documentation anybody, or they're simply bad. So, and when, wouldn't it be really nice if there would be a place where you can see all this? And the young lady is very upset that I use her picture all the time. And there are wonderful places in there. Like I say, what helped me a lot to make peace with JavaScript was Eloquent JavaScript, which is an interactive HTML book. So you should go and just download that. So you read about a construct, and then you can straight away go and try it in the browser. So that's pretty cool. There is a few more resources which are mentioned here. Some of the people looked around and say they don't like W3 schools because it's not fully accurate. But I say to get started, it's pretty okay. The other thing is, like I said, JavaScript is a language, and language are not only subject to grammar, they're also subject to style. So, and if you want to write proper JavaScript, there are a few websites around, JSLint, JavaScript.lint, that take your JavaScript source code and tell you, is it nicely written? Not does it run, that's something you can figure out when you run it yourself, but is it nicely written? And the first one was JSLint, and that's actually written by Crockford, who's the guy who I think he works for Yahoo and wrote this wonderful book, JavaScript, The Good Parts. And if you look at the upper right corner, it's so nice. Warning, JSLint will hurt your feelings. So anything that should go into production should go to JSLint. I'm looking for a volunteer who would go and port JSLint or JSHint, which is not as harsh, into a plugin for Domino Designer. It's entirely written in JavaScript, so it shouldn't be that hard. JS hint is somewhere on GitHub. Okay. The other thing is pretty funny. Even a president of a big country promised that he would take that. There is Code Academy, and that teaches you how to do JavaScript. This is like, say, when you mush and there's nothing nice in TV, that's a good place to stop by to get a little refresher. Okay. There are a bunch of books around there. What I mentioned already is the JavaScript, the good parts, and most of the titles what O'Reilly has have quite a bit of information in there. What is pretty good to look at, and I like it a lot, is Pro JavaScript design patterns that allows you to say, okay, there are a set of challenges you come across all the time. How do I solve that in JavaScript? Don't reinvent the wheel too often. It's good enough if you do that 2 or 3 times a day. Okay. So let's have a little bit of a look at JavaScript on the XPages server. So what I've talked about so far applies to JavaScript anywhere. So if tomorrow you decide, now I like to code in Node.js and the V8 is the best invention since sliced bread, all what I told you applies there. So let's have a look how JavaScript in XPages is slightly different. So the first thing is we hacked a little bit in the naming convention, and says we allow the @ as a name part, as a beginning of a name in a JavaScript function. You try to do that in a browser, you will get an error message. And we did that because we re-implemented a lot of the Lotus scripts functions as JavaScript functions in XPages. So the old Notes developers feel kind of a little bit familiar. So the second one is we can specify the data type. But you have to be very, very careful. It specifies the data type doesn't make JavaScript a strongly typed language. So that is basically a hint for yourself and for the editor. And I said, this is going to be a string. I still can say first name equals 42. The interesting part is when I then go and assign a variable a Java class. I can do that with my own Java classes, like Acme My Class. I can do that with the standard Java classes that are in the JDK. The other thing is, what I can do is I have a tool, command which is called synchronize, and that's necessary because we're dealing with server-side JavaScript, while in the client, well, it runs pretty much asynchronously. Where would I use that? If you couldn't fend off your user demanding that you have a sequential number generator and you want to use that in XPages, synchronized helps you to make sure that only one user is at a time is calling that function. Okay, and my little favorite one, recycle. We all are environmentally conscious, reduce, reuse, recycle. When you use Domino Java objects in an XPages application, you have to recycle them. The rule there is you recycle what you create. You don't recycle what you don't create. I say if you want to drive your colleague nuts, you go somewhere and simply say database.recycle, which of course database is a built-in object, and it beautifully recycles the C++ object below, and you get all sorts of funny error messages. If you're totally unfamiliar with all the Java objects, Bob Balaban made his book Developing Domino in Java, it's 4.6, available free for download on his blog, so you might want to head over there and have a look what it's all about. Okay, there's a bunch of global functions you should know. It's in the help as well. Let's say get component, get client ID. We have an object model there that gives a lot of functions there. And the only way to properly deal with it is to learn them. One of the things I stumbled over from time to time is, like I said, is in the object model the view, because nodes developers automatically think, oh, there must be something in the database, and it's actually not that. It's the JSF view. So we have a nodes view, we have a JSF view, we have a designer view, and all sorts of stuff. But if you do pages, you will get fairly familiar with all this. Okay. So, and one of the things I had earlier said first-class functions, and this slide is a kind of an attempt to explain how a first-class function and should be used. So you have you start with an object where you put your variables inside, and then it returns you a function that you can use, and it has access to all the variables that you have defined inside the object. In server-side JavaScript, you have to be a little bit careful. If you have a function that you put in a JavaScript library, which is actually highly recommended, then that function might be unloaded if your memory gets low, and then your internal variables are gone. So closures in server-side JavaScript have to be handled with a little bit of care, and don't assume that the variables of the mother object will be there when you need them. That's a little bit one of the stumbling blocks once you make peace with closures. Okay, a few things what you never wanted to ask. So there's a few things which go beyond the scope of the session today. So just I want to give you a few inspirations what you can do for managing for using server-side JavaScript. There is a script object in the Domino Designer that allows you to output client script. And what I typically see is users just writing in some script. But the interesting part is that you actually can go and write a server-side JavaScript function that returns a JavaScript function that then is executed in the client. So that's one of the things you might want to have a look at once you go and develop your JavaScript stuff. The other thing is what I found when you do classic nodes development. We are all guilty of having DB columns and DB lookups to read in some parameters. And then in the first level of enlightenment, you then replace it with a profile document. But in server-side JavaScript, what you would do is you would actually stuff them in a scope. And that could be either the session scope for a specific user, or that could be the application scope that don't change very much. The other thing is what I found quite interesting is when you use script libraries, and my recommendation strongly is if it's more than 5 lines, it should be in a script library. You have to be really, really, really careful there. We are so used when we use JavaScript that we just define variables inside a function and or inside a script library and make the assumption that this variable will be there, and then say control state or have a counter and whatever. JavaScript libraries in X pages are subject to dynamic loading. So the JavaScript library is loaded when it's needed, and it's unloaded, I would say, when you don't expect it. So it might be there or it might be unloaded depending on the memory situation of the server and the concurrency of there. So if you use script libraries, make sure you really only have functions in there, and any variable you want to reuse goes into your scope. What you have to be careful as well is input functions in the scope, because they don't survive there either once you get low memory. This is one of the things when you develop an application that can drive you mad. No? So you're looking for your works on my computer t-shirt, because on your test server that's not under load, everything is fine. And then in production suddenly you get all sorts of interesting errors. What I recommend to look at on, where did I put that, on crazy.com, I have a presentation on custom controls. And in that custom controls, that's another 2 hours to look at. And in that custom control, there is an example how you can use server-side JavaScript to dynamically change the JavaScript that is executed on a server-side event. So, and that's one of the things you have to really, the idea you have to let it sink in. It's an interpreted language, so nothing stops you from changing at runtime the code that's executed. Okay. The other thing is what I found quite interesting is that we are so used to, in Lotus script, I said, okay, I need 5 information, so I hand over 5 parameters. And what I found in JavaScript was much more handy. If I said, actually, I hand over an object as a parameter, so I then can go and make the function much leaner. So and that makes your code a little bit more readable. So instead of a function that's like add customer first name, last name, zip code, you would create a function like, say, add customer, new customer, where you then have a JSON object that contains all this information. Okay, last not least, when you we currently don't have a debugger in the on the server-side JavaScript yet, but Philippe has promised that he will have one. Until then, there are 2-3 options what you have. One is there is an excellent, outstanding debugging toolbar you can download from OpenNTF. Or the other one is, let's say, if your JavaScript function is domino neutral, you actually can go and use the Rhino debugger and debug it on the in the JVM. Okay, let me quickly go to a few of the favorite constructs that we're going to use. Right? Yep. So basic error handling. In Lotus script, we say on arrow go to, and in JavaScript, and I see that unfortunately not often enough, we do a try and catch, and then if you catch an error, you can actually go and use error.message to alert the message, or you can go and raise an error yourself. One of the things what you want to make super sure is that when you run into an error condition and you played with a few nodes objects, like you created a nodes document or you went to a view, that you go and recycle the documents there. Of course, there you need to be careful. Recycle, if the document has been nulled already, will get you another error. So you then go and crash it there. So be a little bit careful what you put in your finally block. The other, say, side-by-side comparison, when you said, okay, how to process all selected documents, and that's you see that on the slide. That's pretty straightforward. You can say simply simply use the view panel, and you get selected IDs. What's interesting there is that in X pages you only get the IDs, while in Lotus script you would get a document collection with the where you directly have access to documents. Okay, or the other one is, when I said how do I process the submitted document, we know it's simply document context in Lotus script, and in server-side JavaScript you have two options. One is simply current document, or you say you also can go after the XPages object where you say get document from the current document. There, little word of caution: current document is would be a notes document data source that is closest to the place where you call it. Closest to the place where you call it. When you, for instance, have a repeat control, and inside the repeat control you have a document data source, then current document would point to that document rather than to the master document on top of the page. So a little bit careful there. Okay, so the other thing is what we often do in the web applications, that we read the URL parameters. And in LotusScript, you have to have a query string field in your form, and then you go and rip it apart using the ampersand sign. Where in server-side JavaScript, you simply get the URL parameter using the context variable. A little word of caution when you use URL parameters: you should not ever execute a write-back action solely based on URL parameters, because that's a violation of web principles. The web says if you want to read something, it's get, and if you want to change something, it's post, put, or delete as a command word, but never get. I think Lotus is a little bit guilty in classic Domino, where we have delete document that executes with a get statement, which opens you up to all sorts of cross-scripting attack vectors. So when you use parameters, use them to specify what you need, but not to specify an action there that alters data, because that's a violation of web principles. Okay. The other thing is what we, let's say, I mentioned earlier, is that the server-side JavaScript treats arrays, or JavaScript in general treats arrays much more like LotusScript treats the lists. So there's no read in preserve. You just can go and use the values as they are. Okay. So then the other thing is, which is quite a question that pops up quite often. Oh, how do I go and deal with rich text in the web? And in server-side JavaScript, that's pretty easy. Get component body get value, which will give you access to the MIME value. And, hey Stefan, I want a rich text. I don't want MIME. And the thing is, so everybody speak after me, the web knows no rich text. It's the ghost of Christmas past. What you deal with in a browser is HTML, and if you have HTML inside HTML, that's MIME encoded. You upload a file, it's uploaded in a MIME format. If you build new applications, you might want to go and make sure that you don't convert back and forth to rich text, because that's a major headache. If you have existing applications, you have to live with the headache, and you might want to look at a little bit of the tooling that's available from our business partners to make that really shiny and nice. Okay. Then I mentioned earlier with the parameters. So one of the things what you would do is you see the example on the right hand side, that I go and use the view scope to store global variables, and then in the function I use the view scope. So I never go and store the values inside the script library. I always go and use them, store them in the scope. One word of warning: you should not use any nodes backend classes, nodes document, nodes view, or whatever, inside a scope other than the request scope. Of course, that's okay. The request scope gets discarded immediately after request. But what happens is that the Domino server recycles that underlying C object the JavaScript object points to, and then you get all sorts of funny error messages, and your code doesn't work. And the worst case, you create a memory leak. So you don't want to do that. Okay, one little example. That's one of my little favorite. Application parameter management, and I would go and conclude that. That's the second last of my examples. This is a pattern that I realized that works very well in a script library. I go there and said, okay, I define a variable, set up, and then I give it functions where I use Java syntax, get whatever value, set whatever value. So I can go and if I want to at some point in time, and I'm probably sure that there will be a seminar around that as well, or it has been already, I could swap that function out for a managed bean without the necessity to go and change values on the in my XPages application. So that's a pattern for JavaScript handling. Don't go and do the same thing what all the Lotus script developers, we included, have been guilty for a while. Create a script library with 500 independent functions, but group them into JavaScript objects, and then stick to the naming convention that is also used in Java for the Java beans. So if you want to, maybe you never get to the point, but if you want to, you could go and swap it out for Java code without revisiting every single XPage to then refactor the code there. Okay, and I actually have it there for you. What I said, dynamically modify JavaScript in events, and I think I used it somewhere in a custom controller through an OpenNTF. Is I can get I can go after the Java Faces application, and then really go and get my hands on the listener, and then can look for the method binding, and then change the query safe document with my own function. There's a little bit of a URL in the slide deck, so that is kind of not visible. Some are running in a Windows VM, no wonder. So don't need to understand everything of the pieces, but there's interesting ramifications. So I can go after the document data, and then I can get my application, and then I create a new listener function, which is simply a string. You see, that looks a little bit like JavaScript. And then I can use what is called the method binding. And then in the method binding, I go and say, okay, I update my query safe event, so which is pretty powerful. Okay, there's a little bit more reading materials, just a few references where you find additional stuff, and that's what I have to say for the time being. So, opening for questions.
Well, thank you, Stefan. One question to start with. You mentioned a crazy site, something about a crazy site where you had a presentation. Could you put the URL in the chat for everyone?
Okay, it's a chat. Okay, let me say the present. So that is. How does that work? Okay. I just type it in my chat, so that's crazy.com.
Yeah, and be sure you choose to send to all, to everyone, to entire audience.
Is that? I don't have that in the list. Interesting.
Oh, you're just a panelist. Just send it to the organizers, and we'll repost it.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That'll be fine.
So.
Prezi. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, Paul Donebi will post that in the chat for everyone. That's the site where Stefan has the presentation, I think, on custom controls, you said, right?
Yep,
Oh.
I did this presentation in Australia for
Okay.
the Oslo.
All right, we're up to the Q&A time. So to ask a question in your GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar interface, there'll be a questions pane, and you can enter a question, and we will go through your questions, and Stefan will then verbally relay those questions to you, so you can answer them. So we may not, we probably won't put the answers in the questions pane. We will answer your questions verbally. So right now, we don't have any questions. We're just waiting. And so while we're waiting, the slide that's up on the screen has our contact information for TLCC and GBS. And just a reminder, we got some great spring deals going on. If you're interested in learning more about JavaScript or XPages or anything Notes and Domino related, or if you're interested in contacting GBS for training or services on XPages, you can contact Paul Calhoun. So do we have any questions? We are here waiting and ready for your questions.
There is a comment from John Paul. He really likes your humor, Stefan. He likes the humor in your examples. I caught a few of those as well.
Okay.
While we're waiting for other folks to post questions, one question that I have is terminating statements, particularly block statements, like your if, else, if block statements. When you get to the end of that, do you terminate that with a semicolon, or sorry, with a semicolon, or can you get away with not terminating those? And what are the general rules on when to terminate and not?
Okay, so in general, if you have an if-else statement, you put that into curly brackets anyway. So you say if, then you have a round bracket where you put your condition inside, then you have an opening curly bracket, then you put in whatever statements you need for the positive case, and then you close that with a curly bracket. The general rule is, if you have inside your if statement, like say, okay, assign this value, echo that, the individual statements need to be separate by a semicolon. The last one before you close the bracket does not need to be terminated with a semicolon. But it actually doesn't harm. In the slide deck, when in the materials about good JavaScript, there is a link to a very elaborate piece of essay actually that says what are the ramifications of JavaScript engines trying to, I would say desperately trying to put the semicolons in there. And it's really an enlightening read, because it says what coding style, like say where you put your brackets at the end or the beginning of the line, has what impact onto JavaScript. So it doesn't harm to put in an extra one.
Okay. Number of questions about, where do we get the presentation? Are they going to be available? The presentations and a recording of today's webinar will be available. And as attendees, you will receive an email with the download links in the next coming days.
Okay. I don't think there's any questions waiting, Stefan.
There's a lot of comments, a lot of very positive comments. I'd like to relay them to you, Stefan, if you're not seeing them. But I think that your presentation was very well received by quite a large audience today. So there are quite a few very positive comments.
Okay, good. So I see one chat question was around the previous slide, the comparison of Lotus script and server-side JavaScript. There is actually a bunch of slides where we compare the two. Which one was that he was looking at?
Yeah, Stefan, I'm not sure exactly which one he was looking at. So if that person can clarify what slide exactly he was talking about. But I actually had a question, Stefan, on your URL parameters and on the cross-site scripting that you mentioned. Having just went through a PCI security audit where they went through and analyzed our site, and they brought up an issue about cross-site scripting in the Domino server. I was wondering what your comment, if you can clarify a little more on the comment about what we should not be doing in the in regards to working with the URL parameters.
Okay, so there is one of the things I say, I'm probably get wrecked by my colleagues for that, where the Domino server traditionally only was for processing get and post requests. And in the classic Domino development, there is, I say, a question mark delete document is a GET request, which is a blunt violation of all web principles. I don't know why that has been implemented. Probably there's an entertaining story behind it. But when you design an application, I say, a cross-scripting attack means that somebody gets to execute some JavaScript and then calls a URL on your server as if it was you, so if it was your authenticated session. XPages itself is pretty safe there because, like I say, you actually need to post things back and you've got a session ID, and if you don't have all this, the XPages server basically ignores you. So the danger of cross-site scripting is mainly around when you get things. So your parameters you use in the command line, like say on the URL, which is the web command line, should never execute something that alters your data. So if you said, like say, display customer ID is 123, that's totally okay because you're going to load the customer with the customer number 123. But if you say, like say, activate discount code equals 47 and customer code equals 123, which then would go and assign an account discount value to a customer, that's a bad idea because simple get against this URL is executed. So anything that changes data should always be a post. And then a diligent web admin would go and use the firewall or the redirection rules to actually stop a question mark delete document from ever reaching the Domino server. Does it make it a little clearer?
Yes, that was helpful. Thanks. So, Paul, I think you have some questions. We're getting some questions queued up now. Paul, do you have one to pass on?
Yes, a question from Vernon. You haven't mentioned much about Dojo. Is Dojo good to know and invest your time in?
Yes. So Dojo probably, it would be worth at least 1 or 2 sessions on its own. There's 2-3 considerations you have to be clear about. So IBM has decided that we're going to use Dojo, and we used it in our whole project portfolio. And even if you think, like, say, jQuery or BlueTools or whatever is so much nicer, so much better, that will not make it go away. And then I would recommend go with the flow, because this is what we use. This is what we bank on. The XSP object uses it, so knowing it makes a lot of sense. So the second thing is there's a lot of things where Dojo has ready-baked functions, which are quite a headache when you want to do it yourself. So you want to do any AJAX call to server, whether that's in Domino or whether you have another environment. It's so much easier if you use one of the big libraries. And since Dojo is what you deal with in Domino, it's a good idea to be knowledgeable around that. What I like a lot, and I've played around with that quite a bit, is also, like, say, Dojo graphics, where you can go and say, instead of making another export function to Excel, you could go and present dashboards and graphic functions easily using Dojo. A little bit of a warning. I know Dojo Grid is very popular. I'm not a big fan of grids because you end up having two scroll bars, one from your browser and one from your grid. So while they are very powerful and also very versatile, when you deal with it, be clear that you get your user interaction right. And anyway, tabular data, that's so 1999. I haven't seen a table in well, Facebook or Twitter. They do it differently. So short answer, Dojo, yes, absolutely. And the documentation is better than it looks like.
Howard, did you have a question queued?
Yeah, we had a question from Karan. Can we call server-side JavaScript outside the XPages design elements?
You need to have some XPages runtime where that will call the JavaScript function. So if you wrote a JavaScript function inside an NSF, you need to have an XPage that calls it. But of course, let's say with sufficient kernel energy, at the end of the day, the JavaScript function is interpreted by our core runtime. So if you look at the XPages API, you actually could write a servlet that then goes and calls the JavaScript interpreter and executes a JavaScript there. And there you would have the choice between IBM's implementation of JavaScript as well as Mozilla's implementation of JavaScript in form of the Rhino engine, because Domino 5 uses JDK6, so the Rhino engine is there. So the short answer, it's a bit complicated. The long answer, yes, you can do that if you put energy behind it. What I would be curious is, why would you want to do it?
And I would add, Stefan, too, that, yeah, I don't know why you'd want to do it, but at a minimum, you could do what we call an X agent, where you create an X page that only has code in like a before page load event that then redirects somewhere else, or the code itself handles the output, and that way you could then call your server-side JavaScript library in that code.
Yeah.
Question.
Absolutely.
We have a question from Sushant. How do we use two different versions of Dojo in an XPage application?
The short answer, don't. No, you see, you can, I say, not on a single X page. Like say, mixing two versions of Dojo is a big no-no. Since 8.5.3, we don't deliver Dojo on the file system anymore, but it's a plugin. So you could go and actually package your own plugin. If you said, I don't bank on IBM delivering Dojo 1.7 in 8.5.4, so you package your own extension and deliver Dojo 1.7. But you should, on a page-per-page basis, decide which of the Dojos you load. I haven't seen any working examples, whether it's inside XPages or anywhere outside, where people start mixing Dojo versions.
And
I haven't seen all over the internet yet. Okay.
One question we had, do you have any references for server-side JavaScript that's online? Have you seen anything besides the Domino designer help?
Oh, say for general JavaScript, server-side JavaScript, or Domino-specific JavaScript?
I think he meant the Domino. So he said server-side JavaScript, so I'm assuming the XPages implementation.
Okay, so of course, like I say, the premier resource is the Domino Designer Wiki, where you find stuff. But what works actually exceptionally well, it's actually only weeks ago, on the super secret X-Pages chat, the decision was made to start actively using Stack Overflow for server-side JavaScript questions, or for X-Pages questions in general. So if you look for material, there is quite a bit of stuff there. It's also a good place to ask a question. The other place for general server-side JavaScripting, not necessarily specific to Domino, is when you look at CommonJS, which is an initiative to have JavaScript that is workable around platforms, because that has nice examples for stuff that has no relation to a DOM object, which usually only lives inside a browser. So these are the two places I would go for. Google for CommonJS, and you will find quite a bit of examples there. Also, when you look for Node.js, that's also server-side JavaScript, you can gain insights, and then head over to Stack Overflow and look for the X-Pages tag questions.
Okay, good. I think we're running out of time. Let's take one more question. And in regards to reference material, can you suggest any good websites where Dojo samples are available for non-X-Pages applications, so just in general, Dojo examples?
Okay, if you haven't visited the dojatoolkit.org website recently, they beefed up quite a bit of their documentation. And the second one, which, but I haven't visited for a long time, I don't know how current they are, used to be dojocampus.org. So these are the two places where I go to look for my Dojo stuff. So that's the dojatoolkit.org and dojocampus.org.
And that concludes this edition of Group Talk. Thanks for watching. To engage in conversations with us, visit twitter.com/gbsknows. To stay up to date, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/joingbs. And to watch entertaining and informative videos, visit youtube.com/gbsknows. And don't forget, visit our website and send us an email at gbs.com and info@gbs.com. Thanks again.